today about Broxtowe's proposals for an Article 4 direction in Beeston. You okay, Mark? So when we think about the regulation of HMOs, there are two separate regimes, planning and licensing. The first thing to appreciate with Article 4 directions is that they're about planning law, not licensing regulations. Don't confuse the two separate regimes. You'll know that certain types of development don't require planning permission and others do. The General Permitted Development Order lists the type of development that can take place without the need for planning permission. The Use Classes Order puts uses of land and buildings into different categories and stipulates which changes between categories can occur without planning permission and which can. We most commonly think about this in terms of commercial property. For example, A5 being hot food takeaways and A1 being shops. However, it covers residential uses too. C3 is the terminology used for dwelling houses, properties occupied by single people, couples or families. And C4 is properties occupied as houses in multiple occupation. And that's some of the jargon, if you like, that we'll be using. Moving the use of a property between C3 and C4 and vice versa is currently constitutes permitted development with no planning permission required. The definition of an HMO is commonly misunderstood. People say to me all the time, "Oh, Rex, this isn't an HMO because it hasn't got 5 tenants in it." This confusion largely arises by the fact that HMOs with 5 or more people in require licenses, but that's not to say that every HMO requires a license and has 5 people. So a property becomes used as an HMO when it has some shared amenities, isn't made up of purely self-contained flats, and is occupied by 3 or more adults who form 2 or more households. And they occupy the property as their main residence. The key aspect here is the 3+2 rule. 3 adult siblings living together wouldn't qualify since they only form 1 household. A cohabiting couple sharing with, say, a work colleague would, as now we have 2 or 3, depending on who you ask, households. The Article 4 direction would bring the change of use from C3 to C4 within the planning control of the borough by removing permitted development rights to do so without obtaining planning permission. I think a brief history to explain where we've got to now will be helpful. So our friends and comrades at the Nottingham City Council introduced a citywide Article 4 direction in 2012, citing the supposed negative impact of too many HMOs across the city. This is relevant since in the years afterwards, Broxtowe has seen a growth in HMOs, particularly close to the city border. The change of political control at Broxtowe following the local elections in May last year is what's triggered these proposals. By July, they'd announced their intention to pursue the policy, and in February this year indicated they intended to make effective from the 27th of February 2021. However, they're finding that timescale challenging. I'd still say, though, that this is a case of when and not if the direction will be made. So, unlike Nottingham City, it's proposed that the direction covers only part of the borough initially. And as you can see from the map, it covers what we might call the eastern part of Beeston, with the A52 up here to the north. Boundary Road, so named because it's the boundary between the city over here and Broxtowe over here to the east. Lilac Grove down to the south. And then at the east, initially coming down Woollerton Road into the town centre, where at Tesco's it would turn along and then go down Dovecut Lane, meeting up with Lilac Grove at the south. So within this area, after the direction is made, planning permission will be required to move the use of a property from C3 to C4. It's important to appreciate that moving from C4 to C3 will remain permitted development. If a property is being used as an HMO when the direction is made, that use is established with no requirement for planning permission to be obtained. However, the principle of use it or lose it applies. If a property moves from C4 to C3 after the direction is made, you would still need planning permission to regain C4, even if it had this use previously or when the direction was originally made. So as property owners and investors in this area, the proposals therefore create a number of risks. The borough will have planning enforcement options available to it. Owners of properties with C3 use inside the area face what's in my opinion the kind of the most underappreciated factor at the moment, which is the prospect of their property values being substantially decreased. And ill-advised purchasers also face the very real prospect of buying a property that they expect to be able to use as an HMO, but may not have or be able to obtain the relevant planning permission to do so. I've come across a number of clients in this position who've bought properties in the Nottingham City area who need, well, the only thing I could say was they need to be asking some searching questions to their solicitors. But, you know, caveat emptor, buyer beware, you know, ultimately the risk will fall on the purchaser's shoulders. So timescales wise, Broxtowe do have and have considered the option of making a direction with immediate effect, but they're understandably concerned about the financial risks of possible compensation claims arising if they do it without notice. We expect the direction to be made in February 21. However, there's a lot of work for them to be done to meet this. They need robust evidence to justify the making of the direction in the first place. If they don't have it, there's the risk that it could be overturned on challenge. And they also need to get in place the relevant planning policy for determining planning applications that come in for C4 use after the direction is made. Again, you know, if they haven't got that, then if they reject an application which is subsequently appealed, they'd be relying on the robust planning policy in order to defend any appeals. So that's going to take some time. Ultimately it's a question of we wait and see how quickly they manage to get on with it. So in terms of what's next, the owners of properties in this area need to be making decisions now about whether to establish their C4 use. You know, we're agreeing letting 12-month tenancies on properties at the moment that extend beyond the expected imposition date. You know, and in some cases, we've been advertising properties on the basis that they must be occupied by 3 or more unrelated tenants. You know, the irony of this, you know, in that it is causing further reductions on the amount of family property available, you know, isn't lost on us. And I don't think it's lost on Broxtowe's officers, but unfortunately, that's not shared by the councillors. Owners wishing to establish and maintain a C4 use of their property need to appreciate the importance of having evidence to support this. Tenancy agreements at a minimum, but also council tax records and rent payment history will be important. In future, there will inevitably be gaps in occupation at the property, either of some of the rooms or maybe of the whole house, say if it's being refurbished. So record keeping to explain any such gaps will be crucial if there are any discussions about whether the C4 use was or has been lost. If you're buying or planning to buy a property within the area that you want to let as an HMO, you'll need to insist on the production of a certificate of lawful use from the vendor. You know, this is obtained from the council and confirms that the use, which in this case C4, is lawful. And finally, owners and agents will need to bear in mind situations where the property changes use accidentally. There are a number of common occurrences when this might happen. For example, a property may be let to 3 sharing tenants, young professionals, let's say. After a year, one of them moves out. The other 2 want to stay on without getting a replacement. Whereas in the past, the owners might have said, yeah, fine, no problem, as long as you pay the, as long as you pay the full rent, that's fine. Now or in future, that could cause the potentially irretrievable loss of the C4 use. So I think we've managed to hold up on the IT there. I'll be handing over to Jade now, who's going to go on to the next part of the forum, the next part in relation to the lettings market. I hope people will be able to use the chat function in order to contact us. Jade, are you there?
Rex, it's Steve Dan.
Yeah.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sure.
I think that's fine. You need to know with Article 4 directions, when the council makes them, that they're subject to only 6 months being there before the Secretary of State has to approve them. So they have to go through a process like changing any local planning policy, and it's challengeable. And I know that the officers don't necessarily agree with the members here on this. And this is driven very much by some local councillors concerned about the impact of student letting in the main. And you're absolutely right to say that, you've got to be careful how you manage these things. But in essence, Broxtowe would have to show that there is a real impact of students now causing nuisance and disturbance and so on. Whereas 3, professional people, not students, sharing a property wouldn't ordinarily create a fuss or a problem usually. So the council are going to have to demonstrate that they can persuade the Secretary of State to make this permanent. And I think that's something that we ought to have a talk about sometime over whether it's worth attacking that one. Sorry, okay. I won't take any more of your time.
No, that's very helpful. Right. As I said, the chat function is available there, and we'll just get Jade set up now. Can you hear us, Jade?
Yes. Hello.
Right. I think we're nearly there. Okay.
Great. Okay, thanks, Rex. Hi, I'm Jade. I'm the residential lettings manager. So I'm going to talk to you about the residential lettings market nationally and locally. So the Conservative manifesto from 2019 included better deals for renters. This is still very much a talking point in 2020. So examples of this are the abolition of the no-fault Section 21 evictions, lifetime deposits. So it kind of says what it is on the tin. If a tenant pays a deposit with CP Walker & Son and moves agent, the deposit moves with them, rather than having it refunded to them directly. Protection from rogue landlords. They want to strengthen the possession rights for good landlords, which is slightly contradictory to the previous point of wanting to abolish the no-fault Section 21 notices. They want to professionalise the market. So the way the government see their interest going is more towards the bigger boys in the market. This could be at the expense of traditional and smaller clients like some of yourselves. The trends that we've seen in the market are shorter term Airbnb listings. That's gone up quite considerably, better money making. We also think the government might intervene in relation to pets. They're under pressure to make lettings more pet friendly, which I've seen an increase in people wanting to rent properties that are pet friendly. Brexit, I've noticed a trend in applications from those who are overseas, only wanting 6-month tenancies. They're a bit unsure still of what's happening with Brexit. It's still in the background at the moment because of what's happening with COVID. So on to the local market. So I've got a couple of graphs to show you about the local market in relation to demand. So this first graph coming up now shows the supply and demand for properties on our patch recently. So the blue chart shows the percentage of properties in the different price brackets. And then the green chart shows the demand again in percentage terms, which is measured by the inquiries for those properties logged by Rightmove. There's a huge demand for properties that we might think are more towards the end of like the lower market. This is where there's the biggest gap between supply and demand. The 400 to 500 part of the graph, that's the only category where demand is actually higher than supply. Our second graph, we actually did our own analysis from looking at properties on our patch listed during the first few months of 2018, 2019 and 2020. We wanted to quantify what we thought was an increase in the proportion of HMO style accommodation. The proportion of HMO style properties has increased from 56% in 2018 to 64% in 2020. We're concerned about there being an oversupply of this type of accommodation. This third graph, one thing we're always talking to our clients about is seasonal variation. This graph demonstrates that. This shows the number of lettings we've agreed per month over the last 3 years. We try to manage your stocks so that they're available during the peak season. In 2020, you'll see the impact that COVID had, but at this stage now, we're actually recovered to normal levels. So what's in the pipeline? There's some developments that are in the pipeline to make you aware of. You might already know Station Road, the development which is in between Tesco and the Manor. That's got 132 apartments. At Barton, that's 250 homes. Technology Drive is 300 homes, and there's 50 at Myford. So the talking point of the year, COVID. I've already showed you that we are in post-lockdown recovery now, and the numbers are starting to look really healthy. Our main concern is a significant reduction in university-linked people from September 2020. We think that there's stable rents at the moment. There's some conflicting evidence on that. Whereas Rightmove reported they were down, by 2.5% in the East Midlands. Our own analysis shows that they're actually increased by 2.7%. There have been noticeable differences in tenants' expectations. There's been an 84% increase in renters searching for properties, including gardens. We had some decent weather during May, so working from home in the garden's quite appealing than working in an office with aircon. Alongside the fear of Brexit, I've had quite a few people worried about signing 12 months agreements with the impact of COVID, redundancies, pay cuts. People are worried about the future, and getting fixed into a 12-month agreement is just quite scary to quite a lot of people at the moment. With overseas arrivals, as we see at the moment, changes in this are the biggest risk to the market short term. So a few weeks ago, when we're still in the midst of lockdown, I had an application from someone in Spain. They had to have their accommodation sorted, their tenancy agreement signed and everything ready before they were actually allowed to book flights to the UK. Over the past couple of weeks, I have seen a bit more of an increase in applications and people wanting to apply for properties from overseas. So I do see that is getting better. It's just the university linked people for September that's a bit of a worry at the moment. So what do we think you should invest in? So risk appetite. The returns available in HMO style accommodation are still the highest. But that comes with the risk of there being a lot of supply in that market and what will happen with the universities this year and next year. Other types of investment will generate lower returns, but also lower risk. Be clear on your target market. Whatever you decide, be clear on your target market before you start. Modern, clean, tidy, that's our golden rule. As long as it falls into these three, it will let. Smaller sized units. So consider smaller size units because they make good investments. Some of those, therefore, are leasehold. So please don't rule out leasehold. So when we're thinking about what to avoid, it's all about entry price. So prices on our patch particularly are high. We don't see many bargains around now, so we'll try and avoid overpaying if you can. So the low to mid market, this is the riskiest place to be. Students want properties to be nice. They've got higher expectation these days. It's not about a property being cheap or cheerful. They've come out of holes where they've had everything included, their bills included, they can walk in, it's ready, it looks good, and they're used to the high life, so they still want that high life in the next property that they go into. Rex has already talked about Article 4 risks in quite a lot of detail. You just need to be conscious about investing in that Article 4 area. So I've already shown you that there's high demand for entry-level family style property, which makes that market more appealing. However, when you are competing against owner occupiers, this could drive up the price. So it is something to be aware of. As Rex said, there's a question box for at the end, if you do want to ask me any questions, but I will pass it over to Mark now.
That's great, thanks, Jade. Just give me, give me a moment. Thanks. I'm going to move Mark in then. I'll go in the other room. I should be fine now. Not yet. Just let me get sorted out. Okay, just bear with me. Okay, Mark, can you hear me?
Yep. I just wonder, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. In that case, I'll begin. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces, and nice to see some faces that aren't familiar as well. So welcome, everybody. My part is probably going to be the most straightforward, far less in the way of graphics, etc. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about our area. I'm sure most of you already know, which is why you've elected to invest in this part of Nottingham. We have a very popular area, which has certainly become one of the go-to areas of Nottingham now, with a thriving town centre. We've seen a number of national chains. We have more coming, and soon there will be a cinema in Beeston as well to compete with the ones in the centre of Nottingham and at the Showcase. It's become more of a destination town now, particularly with the arrival of the tram. Very good area for employment as well. Some of the biggest employers, the university, the QMC, of course, and Boots, although there is the prospect of losses in certainly the university and Boots. But at the same time, we've seen some new business parks opening up, particularly to the south of the station, the Beeston Business Park there, with a number of national and international companies. I'll move on to Nottingham. Generally is a fantastic city in the centre of the country. Beeston is a very well supplied part of town as well, part of Nottingham as well, with brilliant links via the A52 to the M1. We've got a mainline railway station here as well, and significantly a big improvement to the area in terms of transport was the arrival of the tram a few years ago. It's had a big impact on the immediate area in terms of bringing new people to the area, but also in bringing business to the area too. The housing market, I personally think we have a bit of everything. I think there's Victorian, Georgian houses, as well as more modern estates and developments, and quite a large supply of good quality council, ex-council, local authority building too. So a nice mix of property, similar to other parts of town, but still very much its own beast here. And move on to the swear word, or what was the swear word, Brexit. We had 4 years really following the referendum result, where the UK voted to leave, where the market was very unsure, and immediately after the vote there were scaremongering predictions of huge price falls in the market, going into free fall. The reality of it is somewhat different really. Far from falls, we've actually seen a slowdown in the growth rate of property prices, but generally, apart from an occasional blip, the property market has continued in a healthy vein, and with rates of increase. At the end of last year, when we were supposed to have been leaving the EU, the market slowed again, principally because of the uncertainty of what was to follow. Also, traditionally, this time of the year begins to slow anyway. So in December, when there was a very decisive general election result, it brought a lot of people back out onto the property market, both people buying and people selling. There was the knowledge that we are leaving the European Union on the 31st of December this year, and people were able to make plans. So if I can now move to this year, and as it says there, January 2020, the market started to recover very quickly, as I mentioned earlier, because of the regained confidence of buyers and sellers. And traditionally, the Christmas and winter months of the year tend to be more of a planning time for people, where they're beginning to make plans for a move later on in the year. But because there'd been such a backlog over the past 3.5, 4 years, that didn't occur this year. And I think it was really a collective sigh of relief that brought everybody back out into the market. Traditionally, again, in January and February, I do my major part of my valuations of the year while everybody is planning. This year was an exception, in that not only was I valuing property, but a lot of people were actually bringing their properties to the market straight away. So I've mentioned already the backlog of buyers and sellers. I don't need to go over that again. I've also told you that the beginning of the year has been very good. And in fact, Zoopla recently published some, well, I say recently, it seems like recently, but when you think we lost 3 months, March 19 to March 20, Nottingham was one of the better performing cities in the country. And that's a whole, that's 4.1% for Nottingham as a whole as a city. And it could be argued that parts of town like Beeston, like West Bridgeford, like Mapley, for example, which are traditionally more in demand, have seen a slightly higher year-on-year growth in that period. So we all started with a smile on our face, with enthusiasm, optimism, and unfortunately, not just for the economy, but for all those poor people who've suffered and lost their lives, the coronavirus came along and the country went into lockdown. Goes without saying, you all know, immediately there was a halt to any property-related matter whatsoever. And the first thing that I noticed was a number of sales lost. And as it says on my slide, because people had been convinced, or I say been convinced, they had been talked into via the press, via the media, that there were going to be huge price drops, and 30% is an enormous amount. And of course, since then, we've had a number of people losing their jobs, and they were worried about taking on bigger commitments, bigger mortgages, when there was some lack of security for their future and for their income, for that matter. Since the government lifted the restrictions somewhat, again, rather like Brexit, a lot of people were so relieved to be able to get out and do something, and having lost the dominant buying period of the year, which is April, May, and June really. There was a lot of catching up to be done. So we saw a number of buyers returning to the market. We saw a number of sellers who'd been basically waiting to go. So plenty of new listings, and we were really very encouraged by that. I mentioned above that we lost a lot of, well, not a lot, I beg your pardon, we lost sales because of the price drop predictions, the insecurity. It's interesting to note that some of the people that quoted the fear of prices and tried to renegotiate at considerably lower selling prices, those same properties were then sold as soon as the lockdown ended at similar and in some cases higher figures. That tells us a bit, I think. Another incentive that the government has used to try and bring some life back into the market early on is the stamp duty. It's the stamp duty holiday, and we've seen instances where perhaps some people are trying to take advantage of that by increasing their asking prices on the basis that a prospective buyer is saving a bit of money on his stamp duty or her stamp duty for that matter, and may in that event then perhaps pay a little bit for their house. As Jade and Rex have said before, it's predicting what comes next, which is very difficult. There are some interesting signs in the market, and if I could just address the ones that we're seeing from mortgage lenders and banks at the moment. A number of the first-time buyer products, attractive first-time buyer products for bigger loan to values. I think the quote I saw was almost 50% of those products were removed straight after lockdown in June. This, coupled with something that we also understand is happening now in that lenders, surveyors are being urged to be cautious over the valuations that they're producing, lead me to think that that the lenders are concerned about the second wave, the end of the furlough. Well, people who have been on furlough who unfortunately won't then be offered their jobs back. So we're a bit concerned about that. Our view of the market is very much as it happens. We see it happening day by day, and we don't have the statistical modelling approach that the governments and the banks do. And I think that we really have to, as I say, take it on a day by day basis. So it's very difficult for us to predict what's going to happen until we see it happen. So we'll continue in that vein. My final point, which is I think relative to everybody, is that property is always going to be a great investment for you, as long as you have the ability and the desire to keep a property until you want to cash it in, rather than needing to at a particular time when the market may be against you. So it goes without saying the returns on property are hugely greater than those in the bank, and our view, bound to be, I suppose, is keep your money in property for the foreseeable future. That's really about all I have to say, and I hope it's been of some benefit to you, and thanks very much for listening.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. So thank you. I think we appear to have pretty much got on top of the IT now. Thank you very much. There haven't been any questions, specific questions admitted through the chat yet. But perhaps what I'd suggest is if we just have a comfort break for 5 minutes, and then if there are questions submitted through the chat, then we'll deal with those at that stage. and ahead of starting the second half. So just after 6:15 now. So we'll resume again just after 6:20. So there have been a number of questions coming. Great, thank you. And thanks, Liz, for that tip about the video, because I think that's been the golden silver bullet for our for the IT issues that we were experiencing. Much appreciated. We'll take a couple of the I'll take a couple of the questions before we start. Can I ask everybody who's still on with their videos, turn their videos off, because we think that is the main problem that we're having with the losing connection. Yeah, I have, but I've lost some of the questions now. Okay. Having lost connection there, I've unfortunately lost some of the questions that are coming from the chat. I can remember a couple of them, but if it'd be helpful for those that I have, if I could ask them to if I could ask them to resubmit. One of the questions that we had was in relation to differences in demand in the market between furnished and unfurnished property. I think, my view on that would be, I think there's, Jade mentioned that am I back? Yeah, Jade. We've asked whether the differences in demand between furnished and unfurnished property in the market at the moment. Jade mentioned the golden rule: modern, clean, and tidy. I would say I think there's solid and good demand for both. Ultimately, it comes down to who your target market is, and having a very clear idea of the type of person that you want to suit the property that you have. People who want a furnished property tend to be those who are either younger or potentially people from overseas. Those tenancies are often a bit shorter than that there are in unfurnished property, which is more suitable for people who perhaps more kind of the local, normal, indigenous, for want of a better phrase, people whose tenancies are often a bit longer. So I think setting the property up in order to suit the needs and wishes of the person that wants it will help inform the decision about furnished or unfurnished. But ultimately, owners have options to decide what they think is best for them given the circumstances. One of the other questions that we had was regarding the potential financial implications for owners who in the Article 4 area who potentially don't have or lose their C4 use. And I'm going to pass that one over to Mark.
Good, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a tricky one, but the you mind just turning? Sorry, got a bit of a reverberation there. Sorry. It's a tricky one. I think if you look at Lenton, a particularly heavily student-dominated area, and Dunkirk, there can be some fairly significant drops if you lose that usage, and particularly in areas where the rest of the market is student-dominated. It's very difficult then to get people to want to live in those areas, perhaps who are owner-occupiers, and naturally, then I think the fallback is that you end up having to sell to a lower part of the market that can afford it, and really that's that's the compromise for those people. They want that size or type of house, and will compromise on the fact that there are students next door and across the road, perhaps, but maybe aren't able to pay going rate. So I think there's always a danger there. We haven't seen so much evidence of that in Beeston, so it's really quite difficult for me to be specific about this area. But certainly, Lenton and Dunkirk values I should think probably somewhere between 10 and 20%, perhaps. But I'd need to research that a little bit more, but from the top of my head.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'm going to take one more question. As I said, apologies due to having been my connection having been kicked out. I did lose a number of the questions that were submitted during the break. So those I've not ignored or don't wish to answer those questions. The question, I'll deal with one more, and then if I could ask those people to resubmit resubmit their questions, we'll deal with them at the end of the second part. So the other question that's come in is asking what our views are on increasing rents to cover additional costs that are coming up for landlords in, perhaps, specifically electrical testing and finder's fee, and on increases being accepted by tenants. I think pre-COVID, the answer to that was yes, we've been increasing rents. You saw earlier that the year-on-year figures were up. We've been finding that the increased rents have been stood, and we've been able to achieve them. I think we've become a little bit more bearish in the current COVID world, where attention has shifted, I think understandably, to desire to want to retain occupation rather than potentially run risks of losing tenants. But where the tenancies have naturally ended, we've been able to obtain significantly increased rents, and I think it would be fair to say that was borne out in specific relation to the person that's asked this question recently, where the rent had gone up considerably from the previous figure achieved. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second part. Jonathan, if you want to get yourself set up. Okay, Jonathan, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Over to you.
So good evening. Thank you for joining us. I will be giving you a brief insight into what's happening in terms of the legal side of property management. The most recent change is to the electrical safety, the electrical installation condition report, also known as the ICR. This came into effect on the 1st of July this year, and it affects all new tenancies and renewals on the basis of statutory periodic tenancy. From the 1st of April 2021, this will take effect on all tenancies in existence and those on contractual periodic tenancies as well. So what we need to do, we must ensure that these are carried out. They must be given to the tenant before move-in and on renewal. Any remedial works that are flagged up, these would need to carry out within 28 days. Failure to do so could incur a fine of up to £30,000. The minimum energy standards, the EPC rating, so any property below E, now falls out of the rented property sector as such in terms of condition. Everyone was asked to, or was made to increase and improve their properties to be legal in terms of going forward. There are some exemptions, such as tenancy starting before 2007 and those that weren't renewed. The penalty was up to £10,000 if you didn't meet these standards. Failure to meet the standards also means that if you serve a Section 21 notice, this will be invalid. The 10-year validity on the original EPCs are expiring, so these last for the 10 years. Gas safety, although this was brought back in April 2018, it's an MOT style treatment now, which allows you to carry out a gas safety certificate 2 months prior to the expiration date. So if it's due on the 15th of August, for example, you can carry it out from the 15th of June and you can keep the renewal date as is. Tenant Fees Act, brought in 2019, became effective this year. Not just about the application fees, there's a lot more included in that, and there's a lot more charges that can't be made to the tenants. There's a maximum deposit of 5 weeks rent. There's no default payments and issues postponed to deposits. There's a situation there, for example, if a contractor's called out to a blocked drain, for example, or a faulty washing machine, and it was found to be the responsibility of the tenant, we now can't charge the tenant until the end of the tenancy, and that's where we've looked to recover the monies then. So unfortunately, with contractors wanting to be paid, we would look to pay from the landlord and, as I say, recover at the end of the tenancy. One of the biggest things that has affected us, a clause in the contract for tenancy cleaning at the end, a professional clean, as we're now no longer able to stipulate this. It means that the negotiations at the end of the tenancy have become a lot more difficult, and as many of us here probably know, the tenants will always say, I've left it cleaner than I found it. So that has increased our workload on that side of things. So recent changes, there was a case recently with regards to housing benefits. So no longer you're able to say, sorry, no housing benefit, as it's classed as discrimination. We can refuse on affordability. So what we do at CP Walker is work on the basis of 2.5 times the rent. So if the rent is £1,000 and they can prove income of £2,500, whether through housing benefit, other benefits, then we can have a look at that. And if they can't meet that affordability, then we can refuse their application. Right to rent, there is a possible breach of human rights, but at the moment it's business as usual until such time as we're notified otherwise. Retaliatory evictions, this comes on the basis of repairs. So if you don't keep up with your repairs, you're not on top of your repairs, and the tenant calls the council in to carry out an inspection, which is an HHSRS inspection, and subsequently serve notice, you are unable to serve a Section 21 notice on the tenant. So I briefly mentioned about contractual versus, well, contractual and statutory periodic tenancies. So what happens at the end of a fixed term? The statutory periodic is deemed to be a new tenancy, and this is why we're having to do those renewals now on the electrical inspections. They're having to be carried out. The contractual periodic is a continuing tenancy, which allows you to get longer time to comply with new legislation. The tenant must also give notice to end a fixed term expiry under a contractual. With the statutory periodic, it was a bit of a grey area as to whether or not a tenant could walk into the office or drop the keys to a landlord on the last day of the tenancy without giving notice. Also with the contractual, the tenant retains utility liability during the notice period. It's a big issue under statutory with council tax. If a tenant notifies the council that they've vacated the property, they take it as that day rather than at the end of the contract. So it gives us a bit more flexibility on that side of things. So what's next? So there's a lot of talk at the moment about the Section 21 notice being abolished, which would make tenancies more secure. The tenant, yes, could serve notice to end the tenancy at the end of the fixed term, but the landlord couldn't, unless, of course, there is a breach of any of the terms of the contracts, and if there's a genuine reason, such as you wish to sell your property. There is a potential for student property to be exempt, but at the moment we haven't got the full information on that. So we will keep you updated as to when we find out about that. So in terms of the Section 21 notice being abolished, there will be use of the Section 8 notice, which will have to be amended. In terms of the specialist court, the housing court, should I say, they are looking to speed up the process. As some may know, it can take 3, even 6 months to evict a tenant. But if they create this housing court, that should speed things up. Regulation of agents and private landlords. This is something CP Walker have back fully. It's to ensure that all agents and landlords are qualified and working within the law rather than outside the law. Carbon monoxide alarms, we have been installing these in properties for a year or so now, alongside the annual gas inspections. We fully expect this to become law soon, obviously with COVID, etc. A lot of things have been put on hold, but we fully recommend having these installed sooner rather than later. So COVID-19, Section 21 notices. So the notice period was extended from 2 to 3 months, which is also the case of the Section 8 notice. This is currently in force up until the 30th of September, sorry, with a possible extension. Possession claims, so all claims are stayed to at least the 23rd of August. The courts, we now understand, are opening on the 24th, and any claims that were stayed are now being booked in. There was just a brief update I received today that we may have to write, in fact we will have to write to the court and the defendants and give them a reactivation notice to say that you want that claim to go through. But at the moment they aren't processing any new claims. So if you have got a notice on a tenant, you can put the claim in, you can register the claim online, but nothing will be actioned until further notice. In terms of arrears during COVID, yeah, the tenants should pay what they can. There were a number of tenants that thought they could have rent-free periods. Some understood it was a rent holiday. Some were more than happy just to carry on paying as the situation was unaffected. Landlords were asked to be reasonable, and we have very good landlords, and those that did request reductions or rent holidays were more than amenable to it. So access during the lockdown, we were carrying out essential repairs only. So if a boiler was broken, for example, most of our contractors were working throughout. The gas safety records were being carried out, as that was still a legal requirement during that time. Access was a problem with certain properties, but we are pretty much fully up to date on those. And in terms of viewing, that's been a staggered start, really. We started viewings on vacant properties. We then have been allowed to access occupied properties, and more recently, the room by room lets. That's me for now. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please do ask. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. So moving on to Dan. Dan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about COVID and the impact upon the university and the student accommodation market. So I think the best point to start at with that is to look at the student population in Nottingham. And as you can see here, University of Nottingham and Trent University had a total of just over 72,000 students in 2019-2020. And that's made up of about 58,000 students from the UK, 750 students from the EU, and 11,500 students from non-EU countries. For the University of Nottingham, that's a percentage of about 25% overseas, 5% roughly from EU, with the balance 20% from outside the EU. That compares with Nottingham Trent at 16% and a national average of about 18%. And clearly the Nottingham University numbers are higher because of most people know they've got two campuses overseas, one in Ningbo, China, where they've got about 6,000 students, and about 5,000 students in Malaysia. And generally what happens is the students at those campuses will, a lot of them will come and visit the UK for either 1 semester, 2 semesters, or 2 years. They often do a 4-year course with 2 years in home country, 2 years in UK, and it's called a 2+2 course. In addition, in Nottingham, we've got a new university. I don't know if people are aware of that, but September 19, the University of Law opened its Nottingham campus, and there are plans to expand that to about 5,000 students. I'm also just going to touch on as well international students at Nottingham's further education colleges. Kaplan, large international company, run international colleges with the University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent. It's called Tunic University of Nottingham International College and Nottingham Trent International College. Now these are like foundation year courses for mainly Asian students who come to the UK to get language and other skills up to speed prior to entry into the university system. And those people that live locally to Beeston, you've probably seen a lot of students crossing the road at the University Boulevard University of Nottingham tram stop over to the Science Park, and those are usually students at the University of Nottingham International College. Nottingham College used to be Central College. Now Nottingham College also has a significant number of students on similar courses, these sort of foundation year courses. So when we look at the total number of non-EU students in Nottingham, it's in excess of 12,500. It's it's a pretty large number, and surprising to many people. Okay, so look at COVID and the impact it's had on teaching. Many students returned home following the campus closure in March this year. Teaching assessments moved online. The universities have both announced plans to reopen for 2021. They're going to deliver the teaching subject to social distancing, which means lectures to groups of over 50 to take place online using Microsoft Teams or Engage, and smaller groups, seminars, tutorials, etc., to take place on campus but in larger rooms. And because of the fact that more demand for larger rooms, it's had an impact on the timetable, and that's had to be adjusted to provide 3 more weeks of teaching time due to these social distancing measures that have had to be introduced. And that's been achieved by shortening the Christmas and Easter vacation periods and also removing the January exam period. So we're looking at the impact on the number of students at university. Get the easy one out of the way first, which is what we call the returning students. So that's the 2nd and 3rd year undergraduates and returning postgraduates. So they've been invited back to campus as normal in September. There may be some students that will seek to defer entry, but by and large, those students should be returning to Nottingham. We then look at the new intake, and by that we're talking about the school leavers, 1st year undergraduates and new postgraduate students. So you may have seen in the media there's been quite a lot of debate on whether the school leavers will start university or look to defer. And the fear of missing out on the sort of Freshers' Week fun and games, and generally the sort of social side of the university experience has been sort of the main debate point when we've talked about that. And because of the sort of the fears on numbers, and in particular the fears on how many international students will return to the UK, the university has been allowed to extend their admissions for 1st years by 5%, which sounds like a lot, but it's probably only in figures about 500 students. So it's not sort of significant in terms of the overall population of international students, but no doubt it's gonna sort of help to balance numbers. In terms of the 1st years, I suppose the question is what happens if to the 1st year undergraduate, the freshers, what happens if they choose to defer? They're probably not going to be able to all come to university next year, because obviously we've got a new set of school leavers. So the university can't double the size of the intake next year. And, traditionally people will go on gap years, they go travelling, they might get jobs in bars and what have you. So I think we feel it's unlikely that you're going to get a large number of people's deferring. What else can they do but go to university? And it does sort of correlate with times of economic hardship. You do tend to get sort of jumps in people studying because people can't go and get jobs. Clearly, the sort of area of most concern for the university is in relation to international students. And I mentioned before the exchange program that the university runs with their campuses in China and in Malaysia. They have announced quite early that the single semester and 2 semester visits had all been cancelled for next academic year. Some of the master's courses as well have been either cancelled or delayed to a January 2021 start, and these are generally those courses, for example, at the business school with large numbers of international students. The returning 2+2 students are expected to return as normal, and new 2+2 students have been invited back to study, but they've been given options if they're not willing or not able to travel. And those options are either stay in their home country for 1 semester and then transfer, stay for the year and then transfer, to convert to 4 years studying in Malaysia or China, or remain at home and receive online education. So when we sort of think about whether or not international students will want to come to the UK to study, I think what we need to think about is how the UK is perceived as a safe place to travel to. And this doesn't mean, how well we think we've dealt with the COVID problem, without sort of wanting to sound political. It's the image of the UK on the world stage. It's what they think about us rather than what we think how well we've dealt with it. There was an interesting report published last week by the University of Manchester, and that indicated that a lot of the Chinese students were afraid to come and study in the UK because of the fears over the high death toll. In terms of numbers, we've got the 3rd highest number of deaths in the world behind US and Brazil, but with far less population numbers. And we're also very high on the league table. I think probably the highest. I think the only country higher than us is Belgium, who have had about 9,000 deaths as opposed to 45,000 in the UK. And the parents who generally make the decisions for the Chinese students have said that it's the safety, health and safety was their primary consideration. It's also not really been helped by the reports of social media in China, which has shown that a lot of the UK not following social distance guidance. We've all seen pictures of beaches with lots of people on them, celebrations after football victories, and also the fact that we don't. It's reported and that we don't wear face masks in public. Now that's something that we probably feel it is a bit of an odd thing to do, but we've all seen Chinese students, Asian students walking around with face masks even before the pandemic. So I think they just think our attitude is a little bit cavalier compared with customs at home. So there's also, I think, when we're looking at international students generally, I think we have to bear in mind reports. You'll see it every day on the news about relations between the UK and China, tensions over the virus, Huawei, sorry, it's very difficult to pronounce, Hong Kong, Snapchat, I think there was this week, but there seems to be issues between the West and China, and it does appear that the UK is sort of siding with the US, and that could have an impact on our trade with China, over the next few years. The Higher Education Policy Institute published some figures which suggested the forecast of cancellations were between 12 and 61%. And we're having reports from China that although the embassies are open now to issue visas, a lot of flights are not open. A lot of the students who want to come are finding it difficult to book flights to come here. I think Glasgow University has already chartered some claims of its own, and you can probably see the Nottingham University following suit. Okay, so when we look at some of that in terms of the accommodation, we feel that there's likely to be, well, we know there's going to be significant numbers of international students that don't travel. There are some concerns over the recruitment of new students, which if it happens, it would impact not only on the current year, but the next 2 years following. Personally, I think I've seen the university gearing itself up to take as many students as it can through the clearing process, in order to try and they are a business after all, and in order to try and make sure that they take as many students as possible. I know colleagues in the office who spouses work at the university have reported that the normal interview processes are not happening, and they've just been told to sort of open the gates and let anyone in. There has been some queries about the purpose-built student accommodation, and when I'm saying that, I'm talking really about the university-owned halls to accommodate students and maintain social distancing. The reasons for that is obviously in the halls, often they're catered, and it's going to be very difficult for them to serve food in communal areas and maintain social distance. We've seen that the university has published on their website that they are talking about converting it to what they call safe collection of food. So whether that means like pack up meals through the day and staggered, but because of the fact that the accommodation makes up a significant part of their income, we can see that they're going to try and maintain those numbers, but it might not be possible. So there might be some students that have to search for accommodation off campus, and particularly if they take high numbers of freshers through the clearing system. So we feel that there could be a last-minute rush for accommodation following the results day on 13th of August. Obviously, no exams have been taken, but we're still getting a results day to publish the results. Now, just to finish, I think it'd be useful to look at the longer-term impact on the university. So the turnover of the University of Nottingham is about £700 million a year. 60% of that income comes from fees, 20% from research, 20% from accommodation, hotels and conferencing activities. So prior to the lockdown, the university had about £100 million of debt, and they've reported that they expect that debt to rise to 175 million at the end of next month. So we can see that there's been a cost to the university of about 75 million because of the lockdown. The university is now facing increasing costs because of the social distancing measures, and also a reduction in revenue. And they are modelling based on potential loss of anywhere in the region of 150 to 200 million pounds. So you can see the debt jumping from 100 million to 300 million within a year. Now, when we look at the international market, out of the turnover of 700 million, there's about 165 million pounds that comes from the international students, and that relates to 40% of the fee income from just 20% of the students. So you can see it is it's a big source of revenue for them, and the costs of losing or seeing that market contract is going to be very damaging on the university. So I think the conclusion of this is that the impact that COVID's had on the university is not just going to be next year. There's some serious business issues that it needs to resolve, and already we're seeing redundancies at the university. So, we hope the strength of the university, it will fight back, but it's certainly not plain sailing. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. It's fantastic, and thanks to those that have been resubmitting the questions. Which, as I said, I'm now manually logging in case we have another connection issue causing me to lose them. But that's great, Dan. Last but not least, come in, Justin, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Over to you then, Justin.
Okay, good evening all. I'm Justin Hevness. I run the insurance broking division of CP Walker & Son. I'm going to give you a flavour of some of the services that we offer with a slant towards property and landlords. Our team's got over 140 years worth of experience from various backgrounds. With a property expertise in the business, we can offer you an in-depth professional expertise from quotation through to any claim or incident. We can use our extensive knowledge to set up, we also used our extensive knowledge to set up one of the country's leading insurance schemes, Property Protector, which we also sell to brokers in and around the UK. We have a specialism in property insurance, and we can deal with single, portfolio, any occupant.
You come by Pakistan, by the way. You did? Yeah. We did on the motorway. She said this twice. You know what it was? She wasn't listening to her. Yeah, she was talking to her. Yeah. I don't know. She's telling me her. And then I was.
Can you hear me now? Hopefully you can hear me. So we can deal with any type of commercial property, any business, trade, business park, etc. And residential includes HMOs, professional, working, retired, student lets, asylum seekers, any occupant. Block management, that brings its different risks, and we work with block managers to cover these risks for the owners or the managers of RTMs. The difficult risks, difficult to place risks, are things like unusual construction or tenants of high risk. Unoccupied premises are always an issue with insurers, but we've got the markets where we can gain full cover, depending on the circumstances and the client's requirements. So it's worth talking to us if you've got unoccupied properties. Apart from property, we're fully independent insurance brokers and have been for over 125 years. As part of the UK's largest network of independent insurance brokers, we have the support and clout to have the edge over our competition and offer our clients competitive rates, but above all, excellent worded policies with the support of a good professional local broker. We can place and support most businesses and industries, and this includes shops, offices, hospitality, including hotels, restaurants and bars. I personally insure a large chain of dessert restaurants, a franchise chain. We've got a chain of supermarkets, and we've also got Europe's largest poker room on the books. Children's day nurseries have got very intricate covers that need special attention, and through my placement, my clients were one of the lucky few to be covered and paid out for business interruption during the recent COVID claims. Not many other trades have actually paid out for this. Professional indemnity is a specialist subject, and we have access to various markets depending on your trade, where we're finding that rates are hardening, particularly in this sector, and it's time to review your covers if you haven't done for some years. Management liability, including directors and officers, is also an important cover, and if you're a limited company, you're not fully protected by the limited status, and you need to protect the individual directors. And you might be surprised to find out how inexpensive this cover actually is. You may have seen the various cyber attacks on businesses during the lockdown, and there's no business that's free from a cyber attack or extortion. For small businesses, this is a competitively priced product and becoming essential. As well as covering your business, we can cover your personal home and even high value motor vehicles. We would ultimately like to become your one-stop shop for insurance. A major issue we see when arranging property insurance is with incorrect sums insured. We and insurers will insure you for any figure that you provide us with. But in event of a major loss, insurers will send out a loss adjuster. Their main job is to check that the sum insured is correct and that the risk details are as you've proposed. If incorrect, insurers, well, they can cancel your cover, but they can apply generally what is called average and reduce your claim that you are making proportionately by the amount of underinsurance, which could be substantial. It's vitally important we have the correct sums insured in the first place to avoid the claim settlement issues, and we recommend rebuild valuations are carried out every 2 years. This can be done by a RICS approved surveyor, or we have access to RICS desktop survey service, which if carried out, we have many policies where the average clause can even be removed. The desktop service is far more competitive, by the way. Is flood risk the main reason your rental property insurance is so expensive? Do you have a large premium or significant excess on your landlord's insurance just because of flood risk? Or perhaps you've had a claim and now find it difficult to get cover at all? We at CP Walker have a fast, easy, flexible cover that sits alongside the main insurance policy, even if that excludes flood damage. Insurance is a key consideration when looking to finance a property. Banks and trustees often require all perils to be covered before signing any agreements. Having adequate flood insurance in place can be the difference between a deal going ahead or not. We've got a solution. If you have a high excess on your property insurance, you can even use flood insurance to fill that exposure. As long as there's a commercial gain, then we class property as commercial. So buy-to-let rental properties are covered under this policy, and we can cover anywhere in the UK. This policy breaks all the rules of standard insurance, and it's a new type of insurance called parametric insurance, which basically means that a payment will be made upon the occurrence of a triggering event. And in this example, we're talking about flood. You can recover faster as claims are paid in days, and there's no need to quantify your loss in the traditional way with loss adjusters and replacement of items. You can spend your money from the claim on whatever you like. That could be reinstating the property or the grounds around it, rehousing costs or other expenses. You are in control of your rental property recovery. Some clients have invested money from claims in flood resilience measures, and that way they're better prepared for the next flood coming their way. This insurer's claim to fame was when Storm Kyra swept across the UK on Sunday, the 9th of February this year. They paid full claims in just 27 hours after the flood hit. They paid the rest of the claims by the following Friday. Having the cash in the bank means that the recovery begins earlier. It means that tenants can move in faster and there's lower exposure to the loss of rent. You can also cover your commercial tenants too. Tenants are often risk averse. If you're unable to secure adequate flood insurance, it can drive down the market value of your property or leave the potential for voids. Sharing details of your insurance can give tenants greater confidence in the location they are renting. If they are operating a business from your property, they can often take out the flood policy for themselves. One of the services that we offer at CP Walker is a complimentary mid-term review. And this is best carried out mid-term and not at renewal, as it takes the pressure off. And hopefully we can find a quiet time that suits you to get your paperwork, your facts, figures, and we can sit around with a coffee and do this at a leisurely time. Ideally, I'd like a face-to-face meeting, but at the moment this can be done by Zoom meeting, Zoom, Teams, telephone or email, whatever suits you. And this is a worthwhile exercise which often has surprising outcomes, as we can assist in plugging holes, advising on over-insurance, under-insurance, and this is an ideal time at the moment to look at this. Of course, being a professional insurance broker since leaving school, I would always advocate the services of using a good insurance broker. Apart from being independent, we have access to a wide range of markets. As members of the broker network, we also have access to network facilities, fellow broker member schemes, and preferential rates from insurers. We also have our in-house property protector scheme, which we have developed. Our staff are all industry-based with a minimum 25 years experience, so have fulfilled their probation in the industry. Along with that, we've picked up many industry contacts, and that helps us place the most difficult of risks. We are always here to hold your hand in event of a claim, which is when you need the most help and when you need your insurance to work for you. Please remember that a broker is always on your side. We act for you, the client. Your interests are at the heart of everything we do, and without you, we don't get paid. Thank you for your time. I hope that gives you an insight of CP Walker Insurance Brokers. I'll be pleased to answer any questions at the end. But before I pass you over, I'm going to leave you with one final image to have in mind when you're thinking about going direct or opt in for that cheap insurance. Back to you, Rex.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much. Sort of a very telling image there, hey? Okay, so that thanks very much to all of the presenters. Justin, I'll keep you. We have now. We've got some of the questions that have been submitted. We'll take a bit of time to go through those. To go through those now. Please feel free to add any others. As I said, unfortunately, the ones that were submitted earlier, I lost when on each occasion that the connection dropped out. So one of the questions here is the crossover in relation to insurance and lettings and management, which is that if your mortgage stipulates, we talked earlier about this issue around no benefits and the legal case around that. So if your mortgage stipulates no benefits, where does this leave the landlord? This is something that we've come across from a lettings perspective. Also, some policies including borrowing of students as well, which is that's kind of a professional property where somebody might be a card carrying undergraduate or postgraduate student. We lost it. Can you hear me on the thing?
I can hear you.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me again now?
Yes.
So from the lettings perspective, we're not aware of a court case yet where a landlord or agent has refused the letting on the basis of the insurance stipulation. That could come. The previous court cases that have been are where the landlord or the agent just simply refused to accept the application on that basis. So, hey. Hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah. So that hasn't been tested in that particular aspect hasn't been tested in court. But Justin, I don't know whether you want to say anything about that from an insurance perspective and the type of products that are available that won't have those stipulations in.
Well, certainly from the most important thing from an insurance angle is that we know, and we always ask, what the tenants are. There is a different risk from an insurance perspective, and insurers do want to know what the tenants are. So we would always ask, are they professional, working, DSS, asylum seekers, students, and different companies are looking for different types of risk, and also there are some companies all rate differently. So we do need to know, and it's important you tell your insurance company the different types of tenant. Okay,
thanks, Justin. The next question is related to electoral checks. So I'll ask, potentially perhaps Justin to mute himself and Jonathan to unmute. And it's regarding the electrical checks. Based on wiring alone, or does it include appliances in the property, whether they be supplied by the landlord or the tenant?
At the moment, it's solely wiring. The PAT testing has always been a bit of a grey area, because if your electrical wiring is up to date and there was a faulty appliance, then it will trip to make it safe. But no, at the moment, certainly some licensed properties, or most licensed properties do have to have PAT testing, but as a general rule, no, it's just wiring.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I'll read out the next question verbatim. It's in relation to the Article 4 direction. I have a property let out to 4 students next year. If I then let it out to 3 students the following year, will this affect the ability to let out to 4 students the year after? Similarly, if I have a property let out to 3 students this year, would I be able to let it out to 4 students in the future? So in that example, assuming that this property is within the Article 4 direction area, then 3 students, on the assumption that they're all unrelated to one another, there isn't a change from C4 use there. It's remaining in C4 use through those changes. If it was a question of moving from 2 to 3, or 3 to 2, or 2 to 4, or 4 to 2, then there'd be some issues. But that, going back to that definition of an HMO, 3 or more people who are forming 2 or more households. So in that specific example, no issue, because the C4 use, the use isn't changing. Next question: with COVID guidance, what access is permitted to landlords and or CP Walker agents to properties while still occupied by tenants? The guidance here is changing. The guidance in relation to property management, so to speak, I think was pretty clear, particularly early on, when really the access was only suggested as being suitable in in exceptional or emergency circumstances. Now things are sort of loosening a bit. A couple of specific things that I would mention is that where the tenant and landlord or tenant and agent relationships are smooth and straightforward and cordial, things are easy. Where they're not, and previously we may have been relying upon contractual obligations for tenants to provide access on 24 hours notice. Obviously now tenants sort of have a bit of who want to be difficult, do have a card up their sleeve, and can make access for us more difficult. In relation to viewings, obviously normally it's common practice and desirable for properties to be advertised and viewed during the notice period, often during the last month or few weeks of the tenancy. At this stage, we're taking the view, for a number of reasons, that we think it's better for better for us to wait until the property is vacant before viewings start. I think that's for the sort of health and well-being, if you like, of the tenants, the viewers, us, and also the logistical difficulties created by the fact that if properties are accessed for viewings, then the guidance remains that the tenant should be out of the property at that time, therefore agree to be out at that particular time, and that they're responsible for wiping down, cleaning, etc. after the viewing. Linked to this is what we've seen is a particular rise in the use of expectation of and benefits of videos to be taken of the property, and that's a kind of that was building up before COVID, but it's been a specific thing that a real growth in, if you like, for obvious reasons post COVID, and our ability to take and use a good quality video increases after vacation. The next question is a fairly technical one about, again, a relation to Article 4 and HMO. It reads, what happens if you have 3 individual tenants and establish an HMO, all 3 stay, but 2 marry each other? Is it not an HMO anymore, but no change of tenants? So in that scenario, we had 3 tenants, 3 people, and 3 households originally. On the marriage, assuming that nobody is related to one another apart from the marriage, then after the marriage we would have 3 people and 2 households, with the married couple forming one of the household and the third person forming the other household. So it would still constitute an HMO. Where it gets potentially a little bit more complicated is, let's say we have a married couple living with one of their brothers. Then there's question marks over the number of households in that instance. And moving on to, I think, the last question that I have submitted at the moment. So if anybody's desperate, conscious of the time, obviously suggest that you submit those through the chat. And the question is: say I'm currently letting a 3-bed to 3 individuals, and I would probably extend it after February 2020. Does that mean I will lose the C4 use afterwards? So I think if I've understood this question correctly, perhaps we're thinking about there may be a period in which the property is empty. So the current tenancy ends. Then there's some time taken, potentially considerable amount of time, to extend the property from 3 to 6 bedrooms or whatever it is. I think I mentioned in the presentation earlier that this is an area that we kind of need to be aware of, and the importance of record keeping to explain any potential gaps is important. So, obviously in this instance, you'd have details of the building work undertaken, how the property is subsequently advertised. Perhaps even there was planning permission required for the extension or the works. But I think with good record keeping, that's easy to account for. The kind of easy thing to an easy trap to fall into, which you'd need to avoid, is perhaps for whatever reason, towards the end of the refurbishment or what have you, you let a couple of friends move in there for a few months to keep an eye on it while the rest of the building work or the extension is done. you know, that is a situation in which you would have created yourself some difficulty. Okay, so with that, I think that completes the questions that have been submitted this time round. Apologies, apologies to anybody who'd submitted a question which had been lost during some of the IT issues that we did have. Thank you for everybody who stuck with it and in your patience with that. This is obviously the first one that we've done in this format. And you know, we look forward to learning from this one and also producing something similar in the past. We'd be very interested, particularly, to know any areas that you'd like us to cover in future forums. And obviously, you have my contact details by email for doing that. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a good evening. Take care, and I hope to see everybody soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.